The chamber orbiting the gas giant was built for beings who preferred certainty. Lines were straight. Surfaces were smooth. Light fell in perfect gradients across polished metal, leaving no shadows deep enough to hide in. To the Jacquard, unpredictability was a flaw of lesser species, something to be engineered out, not accommodated. High Executor Threx Valcor stood at the center dais, his tall, angular frame still as a blade. Around him, representatives of the Galactic Concord watched in composed silence. Holographic projections shimmered above the table, star charts, fleet movements, and a small, unremarkable system highlighted in faint blue. Earth, Threx said, his voice measured. A recently admitted civilization. Fragmented history. Inconsistent governance. Limited interstellar experience. The projection shifted, displaying human vessels, blocky, functional, and elegant. They rely on outdated tactical doctrines, he continued. Their decision-making is emotional. Their command structure tolerates improvisation. A faint ripple of disapproval passed through the chamber. Improvisation was not a compliment. One of the Concord delegates tilted their elongated head. And their capacity for resistance? Minimal, Threx replied. They have not faced a coordinated external threat. Their colonies are scattered, poorly defended. A demonstration of force will suffice. Then why address us? Another asked. Threx allowed a brief pause. Because once we move, it will be swift. I prefer no misunderstandings. There were none. No objections were raised. No alliances invoked. The system dimmed as the projection faded. The decision had already been made long before the meeting began. New Carthage had no warning. Morning light spilled across its oceans, catching the edges of the orbital docks where cargo ships drifted in patient lines. On the surface, cities hummed with routine, transit lines, market chatter, distant engines. It was an ordinary day, indistinguishable from 100 others. Then the sky fractured. At first, it looked like a distortion, heat ripples across the upper atmosphere. Seconds later, streaks of light carved through the clouds, descending in perfect formation. No alarms had time to sound before the first impact. The orbital platforms vanished in white fire. Shockwaves rippled across the surface. Towers folded. Glass disintegrated into glittering dust. Communication arrays blinked out one by one, leaving only bursts of static and fragmented signals clawing for coherence. In orbit, the Dominion fleet moved with clinical precision. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Each strike landed exactly where it needed to: power grids, transport hubs, defense nodes. It wasn't destruction for its own sake. It was dismantling. On the far edge of the system, a human patrol vessel caught the first intact transmission. Under attack, multiple contacts, this isn't a drill. The message dissolved into noise. Commander Elias Rourke watched the feed without speaking. The bridge of the UDN Resolute was dim, lit mainly by tactical displays flickering with incomplete data. Red markers bloomed across the system map, enemy signatures multiplying faster than confirmation could keep up. Sir, Lieutenant Hale said, struggling to keep her voice steady. We're picking up at least 3 capital-class vessels. Possibly more outside sensor range. Confirmed casualties? Rourke asked. Too early to say. Communications are collapsing. Rourke leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as he studied the attack pattern. The strikes weren't random. They were surgical, every hit serving a purpose, each move anticipating the next. They're not probing, he said quietly. They came prepared. Hale hesitated. Orders, sir? The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Around the bridge, officers waited for the command that would define the next hours: fight or flee. Rourke didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the shifting display, tracing vectors, timing intervals, the rhythm of the assault. They're controlling the engagement space, he said at last. If we move in now, we fight on their terms. That's our colony down there. Hale pressed. We can't just. We can, Rourke cut in, calm but firm. Because if we don't, we lose more than one world. Silence followed. He straightened, voice sharpening with decision. Signal all nearby assets. Initiate evacuation protocols. Civilian priority. No direct engagement. A murmur of disbelief rippled across the bridge. Sir, that's a full withdrawal. It's a repositioning, Rourke replied. There's a difference. He tapped a command into the console, marking a series of coordinates far beyond the immediate conflict zone. We don't meet them where they're strong, he continued. We decide where they're weak. Hale exhaled slowly, then nodded. Transmitting orders. From orbit above New Carthage, Threx observed the human response with mild interest. Their ships appeared briefly at the edge of engagement range, then turned away. Retreat. Predictable. Advance, Threx ordered. Maintain pressure. The Dominion fleet adjusted formation, pushing deeper into the system with flawless synchronization. There was no need to rush. The outcome was already determined. Behind them, the colony burned. Ahead, the humans fled into the dark. Threx watched their retreating signatures diminish, his posture unchanged. They break quickly, one of his officers noted. Yes, Threx said, his tone devoid of concern. They always do. He turned his attention back to the expanding map, already calculating the next phase. He did not consider the possibility that the humans had chosen where this war would truly begin. The Dominion advance was flawless. Sector after sector fell into silence as the Jacquard fleet moved deeper into human territory. Their formation remained pristine, angular ships aligned with mathematical precision, each maintaining exact distance and orientation. There were no ambushes, no resistance, no interference. Only absence. On the command deck of Threx Valkor's flagship, the data streams confirmed what he already believed. Human vessels appeared briefly at the edge of long-range sensors, then vanished before engagement. No counteroffensives. No attempts to regroup. They scatter, one of his officers observed, studying the projections. Uncoordinated withdrawal patterns. No central command response. Threx watched the shifting map without expression. They lack discipline. Their species favors instinct over structure. Shall we accelerate pursuit? No. Maintain current vector. His tone carried quiet certainty. There is no need to disrupt efficiency. Efficiency was victory. Every variable accounted for, every movement predictable. The Dominion did not chase enemies. They eliminated them methodically. Beyond the flagship, the fleet advanced into what human navigation data labeled a safe corridor. It was a narrow passage threading through a dense asteroid field, charted decades earlier and marked as stable. Sensors confirmed it. Clear path. No anomalies. No threats. The fleet entered without hesitation. Far beyond their detection range, Commander Rourke stood before a different map. The same corridor glowed faintly across his display, overlaid with layers of hidden data, placements, triggers, timing sequences. Nothing visible to standard scans. Nothing obvious even under scrutiny. Lieutenant Hale glanced between the projection and Rourke. They're taking the route. They were always going to, Rourke replied. You're certain their sensors won't pick anything up? They already have, he said. They just don't know what they're looking at. Around them, the bridge operated in controlled silence. No alarms. No urgency. Just preparation. Rourke tapped a sequence into the console. The display shifted, highlighting multiple points within the asteroid belt, each one dormant, waiting. Timing? Hale asked. Not yet. His gaze remained steady. Let them commit. The Dominion fleet reached the midpoint of the corridor without incident. Asteroids drifted lazily across the void, massive bodies of rock and metal rotating through cold space. Their movements were slow, predictable, catalogued long ago by human surveyors and confirmed by Dominion scans. Nothing had changed. Path remains clear, an officer reported. Threx inclined his head slightly. Continue. The fleet pressed forward. And then the corridor came alive. It began with a flicker, one asteroid shifting trajectory by a fraction too precise to be natural. Then another. And another. Before the system could flag the anomaly, the first explosion tore through the field. It wasn't a single detonation. It was a chain reaction. Asteroids fractured from within, their cores igniting with stored charges buried deep beneath their surfaces. Massive chunks of debris accelerated outward, turning inert rock into high-velocity projectiles. The corridor collapsed into chaos. "Impact alerts!" a voice cut through the bridge. "Multiple vectors, unpredictable trajectories." The Dominion formation faltered for the first time. Ships attempted to adjust, but the environment no longer followed expected patterns. Calculations lagged behind reality. A cruiser vanished as a shard the size of a mountain sheared through its hull. "Reform the line!" an officer barked. But there was no line left to reform. Rourke watched the feed as the trap unfolded. He didn't speak. He didn't react. His focus remained fixed on the timing of each detonation, each shift in momentum. "Phase 2, he said quietly. Human ships emerged from the edges of the field, small, fast, barely visible against the debris. They moved in short bursts, targeting isolated Dominion vessels struggling to regain stability. They struck with precision. Engines. Weapons arrays. Command nodes. Then they disappeared again. No prolonged engagement. No attempt to hold position. "Hit and fade," Hale murmured, almost to herself. Rourke nodded. "We're not here to win." Another explosion rippled through the corridor, scattering fragments across the battlefield. Dominion ships fired blindly into the chaos, their targeting systems overwhelmed by the sheer volume of moving objects. "They're adapting," Hale noted, watching the enemy begin to shift formations. "They're trying," Rourke corrected. "There's a difference." On the flagship, Threx stood unmoving as the situation deteriorated. Reports flooded in, damage assessments, loss counts, system failures. None of it aligned with expectation. "This is not random," one officer said, voice tight. "The detonations are coordinated." Threx's gaze sharpened. "Human origin?" "Yes, Executor." For a brief moment, silence settled across the bridge. Then, calmly, "Adjust scanning parameters. Identify control signals. They're not broadcasting any." Then they prepositioned everything, Threx concluded. The realization carried weight. This had been planned. Not a reaction. Not desperation. Preparation. "Reform the fleet outside the corridor," he ordered. "Withdraw in controlled sequence." The command was executed immediately, but the damage had already been done. Ships struggled to disengage, navigating a battlefield that no longer obeyed predictable laws. As the last Dominion vessels cleared the edge of the asteroid field, the explosions ceased. The corridor fell silent once more, drifting back into stillness as if nothing had happened. Rourke exhaled slowly. "Status?" he asked. "Enemy losses significant," Hale replied. "Not catastrophic, but enough to disrupt their advance." Rourke nodded. "Good. They'll be more cautious now." "Yes," he said. "And that's the point." He turned back to the display, where the Dominion fleet regrouped at a distance, their formation no longer as pristine as before. "We're not breaking them," he added. "We're teaching them." Hale glanced at him. "Teaching them what?" Rourke's eyes remained on the enemy. "That they don't understand how we fight." In the void beyond the shattered corridor, Threx watched the human signatures fade once again. They had struck and vanished. No pursuit. No attempt to capitalize on the damage. It didn't fit any known doctrine. "They avoid direct engagement," an officer said. Threx considered the data, the pattern forming beneath the surface. "They avoid predictable engagement," he corrected. For the first time, the advance paused. Not out of fear. Out of uncertainty. And uncertainty, Threx knew, was the one variable no system handled well. The Dominion fleet no longer moved with certainty. Formation remained intact, on the surface. Ships still aligned, commands still issued in crisp sequences, But beneath that structure, something had shifted. Movements came slower. Corrections lagged. Every decision now carried hesitation, small but measurable. On Threx Valkor's flagship, the change was visible in the data before it appeared in behavior. Signal integrity remains compromised, an officer reported. We're receiving duplicate command echoes across multiple channels. Source? Threx asked. Unconfirmed. No identifiable origin. Threx studied the feed. Orders were being issued, then repeated, slightly altered. Some ships followed the original command. Others obeyed the distorted version. Filter the noise, he said. We've tried. The interference mimics our own encryption. That drew a pause. Mimicry required understanding. Humans, Threx concluded. Across the void, Rourke watched the confusion unfold. Phase progression? He asked. Hale checked her display. Interception success rate holding at 70%. Their network is fragmenting. Good. Keep the pressure steady. No escalation. She frowned slightly. We could push harder. Force a breakdown. And then what? Rourke replied. They adapt, lock everything down, and we lose access. He stepped closer to the console, eyes scanning streams of intercepted transmissions, Dominion voices repeating themselves, contradicting themselves, unraveling. We don't overwhelm them, he said. We let them doubt. The first misfire happened quietly. A Dominion destroyer adjusted its position based on a corrupted signal, drifting across the firing arc of a neighboring cruiser. Automated defenses reacted instantly. A burst of energy lanced out, precise, lethal. The destroyer split apart before corrective commands could arrive. Report, Threx ordered. Internal error, an officer replied. Weapon system malfunction. Threx didn't respond. Moments later, another incident. A patrol wing broke formation, responding to a distress signal that hadn't been issued. They moved into open space, then vanished under concentrated fire from their own defensive grid, misidentified as hostile. The pattern was forming. Not chaos. Manipulation. Sir, Hale said quietly. They're starting to question their own systems. Rourke nodded. That's when mistakes multiply. On the display, Dominion ships shifted more frequently now, their movements less fluid. Small gaps appeared in their formation, imperfections that hadn't existed before. Push the ghost signals, Rourke ordered. Keep them chasing things that aren't there. Hale hesitated. That'll spread their lines thin. Exactly. On New Carthage, the war had taken a different shape. The Dominion had secured the surface, or so their reports claimed. Major resistance had been neutralized. Key infrastructure controlled. By every measurable standard, the operation was successful. Yet the silence unsettled them. Ruined streets stretched between shattered structures, empty of movement. No visible enemy. No organized defense. Only absence. A Dominion ground unit advanced through the remains of a transit corridor, weapons raised, scanning for threats that never appeared. Area clear, the lead trooper signaled. Behind them, a faint sound echoed, metal shifting against metal. The rear guard turned. Too late. The explosion was contained, precise. The corridor collapsed inward, sealing the unit inside. Secondary charges ignited moments later, tearing through the confined space with brutal efficiency. Above the surface, the report registered as a localized structural failure. Another anomaly. They're engaging in close quarters, Hale noted, reviewing incoming data. Improvised tactics. No consistent pattern. Rourke didn't look surprised. They don't need consistency. They're taking risks. They're creating uncertainty, he corrected. Every encounter changes the rules. Back in orbit, Threx monitored the accumulating irregularities. Ground units reporting losses without clear engagement. Fleet elements misaligning under conflicting commands. Systems functioning, but not reliably. Executor, an officer said, voice tight. We recommend consolidating all forces and establishing a fixed command relay. Reduce variables. A logical solution. Threx considered it. Then dismissed it. No. Maintain operational spread. The officer hesitated. That increases vulnerability. It preserves initiative. Threx replied. We will not restrict ourselves because of interference. But even as he spoke, another report arrived, 2 frigates colliding during a formation adjustment, each responding to a different navigation command. The silence that followed carried weight. Rourke watched the Dominion fleet tighten, then loosen again, unable to settle into a stable pattern. They're resisting centralization, Hales said. They can't afford to commit, Rourke replied. Not while they don't trust what they're seeing. He tapped the display, highlighting a series of false signals spreading ahead of the Dominion's projected path. Prepare the next phase, he added. Hales studied the coordinates, her expression shifting. You're pulling them further out. Yes. Into open space? Into a place where we control everything they think they know. On the flagship, Threx turned his attention to the forward sectors. New signals had appeared, faint, fragmented, suggesting retreating human elements regrouping beyond the current engagement zone. A pattern. Predictable. They're consolidating, an officer said. Threx nodded slowly. At last. Despite the interference, despite the anomalies, this made sense. A retreating force gathering for a final stand. Plot interception course, he ordered. We end this. The fleet adjusted, shifting toward the new coordinates. Behind them, the fractured remnants of New Carthage drifted in silence. Ahead, the void waited. Rourke watched the Dominion fleet change direction. They took it, Hales said. Of course they did. He leaned back slightly, the tension in his posture easing for the first time. They need this to make sense, he said. They need a point where everything resolves. Hale glanced at the coordinates again, then back at him. And we're giving them one. Rourke's gaze remained fixed on the approaching enemy. We're giving them exactly what they expect, he said. A brief pause. Just not where they expect it. The star had a name once. Now it was just a variable. It burned at the center of a quiet system, yellow-white, stable, catalogued decades ago by human surveyors who marked it as unremarkable. No major anomalies. No strategic value. That had changed. Commander Elias Rourke stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the system map resolve into clarity. The star pulsed faintly on the display, surrounded by a scattering of inactive devices invisible to standard scans. Each one sat in perfect position, dormant, waiting. Dominion fleet entering outer range, Hale reported. Rourke didn't respond immediately. He studied their approach vectors, their spacing, the way they adjusted formation as they crossed into the system. Still precise. Still controlled. But not flawless. They're tighter than before, Hale added. Trying to minimize gaps. They've learned, Rourke said. Just not enough. He tapped the console, bringing up a secondary layer of data, timing sequences aligned with the star's internal cycles. Confirm all relays are synced. Synced and ready. Good. He exhaled once steady. Hold until full commitment. On the Dominion flagship, Threx Valcor observed the system with measured focus. The signals had led here, fragmented traces of human vessels regrouping near the star. After cycles of disruption, confusion, and scattered resistance, this felt coherent. A final position. A place to end the conflict. Scans show minimal activity, an officer reported. No significant fleet presence. Residual signatures? Threx asked. Faint. Possibly damaged ships or decoys. Threx considered the data. The pattern aligned. Retreat. Disarray. Consolidation. Advance, he ordered. Maintain forward pressure. The fleet moved inward, engines flaring in synchronized bursts. Ships spread into engagement formation, weapons primed, targeting systems sweeping the empty space ahead. Still no resistance. Strange, the officer muttered. They should be here. They are. Threx said. He just couldn't see them yet. No, Rourke said. The word carried no weight, no drama. Just a decision. Hale executed the command. Across the system, the dormant devices activated. It began beneath the surface of the star. Injected instabilities rippled through its core, subtle at first, small fluctuations in energy output, shifts in magnetic containment. Then the reaction accelerated, feeding on itself. The star pulsed. Once. Twice. Then it roared. Solar flares erupted outward in violent arcs, twisting into space with sudden force. Radiation surged, flooding the system in waves that distorted sensors and scrambled communications. Energy spike across all readings, Hale called out. Magnetic field destabilizing. This is escalating fast. Rourke remained still. That's the idea. On the Dominion flagship, alarms cascaded across every system. Executor, the star. Its output is increasing beyond predicted limits. Cause? Unknown. No natural model matches this behavior. The first flare struck the outer edge of the fleet, slamming into a cruiser and overloading its shielding in seconds. The vessel spun out of formation, systems failing under the surge. Recalibrate shields, an officer shouted. Adjust for radiation flux. But the flux didn't stabilize. It shifted constantly, spiking in irregular patterns that defied prediction. Maintain formation, Threx ordered. But formation required consistency. The environment no longer provided it. Human ships emerged from the chaos. They didn't arrive in lines or wings. They appeared in fragments, single vessels, small groups, darting through gaps between solar bursts and debris. They moved like they belonged there. Contact, Hale said. Multiple human signatures engaging. Keep them moving, Rourke replied. No static positions. The Resolute adjusted course, slipping between waves of radiation with precise timing. Around it, other ships mirrored the motion, each following slightly different paths, avoiding predictability. They struck when openings appeared. A Dominion destroyer faltered under a flare, its shields flickering. A human frigate cut through the chaos, fired once, and vanished before return fire could lock. No prolonged fights. No fixed targets. Just pressure. This is untenable, an officer on Threx's bridge said, struggling to maintain control. We cannot stabilize targeting solutions. The environment is too volatile. Then adapt, Threx snapped. We are trying. Another surge hit, stronger than the last. Two ships collided as their navigation systems misread gravitational shifts. One detonated, the other spiraled into the star's outer corona. For the first time, Threx's stillness broke. This is not coincidence, he said. This is engineered. The realization settled heavily. This entire system is the weapon, the officer finished. On the Resolute, Hale stared at the readings, disbelief creeping into her voice. We're fighting inside a collapsing star system. Rourke didn't look away from the display. We're fighting where they can't. They'll lose everything here. So will we, he said evenly. If we stop. Another flare surged outward, illuminating the battlefield in blinding light. For a brief moment, every ship, human and Dominion alike, was visible against the burning backdrop. Then the chaos swallowed them again. Executor, the officer said quietly, we must withdraw. This environment cannot be controlled. Threx watched the disintegrating formation, the scattered ships, the relentless pressure from an enemy that refused to behave as expected. Withdrawal. The logical choice. But logic had failed him here. They brought us here, he said slowly. Every step. No one argued. Because it was true. Rourke leaned slightly forward, voice low. Close the net. Human ships converged, not in a single formation, but in overlapping arcs, tightening the space around the fractured Dominion fleet. Each movement limited escape routes, hurting them deeper into the instability. They're compressing, Hale said. Forcing them inward. Rourke nodded. They want order. Give them nowhere to find it. The Dominion fleet broke. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic collapse. It unraveled. Ships scattered, some attempting retreat, others holding position too long, caught between conflicting commands and failing systems. Coordination dissolved under pressure that never relented. Threx stood at the center of it, watching the structure he relied on fall apart piece by piece. Across the void, human ships moved through the fire like it belonged to them. When the last major Dominion signal faded, the system fell into a strange, uneasy quiet. The star still raged, its surface unstable, but the battle was over. On the Resolute, no one spoke for several seconds. Hale finally broke the silence. They're gone. Rourke nodded once. Around them, the remains of the battlefield drifted, fragments of ships, fading energy signatures, echoes of something that had been certain of its victory. They thought this would be simple, Hale said. Rourke's gaze lingered on the star, its light flickering across the damaged hulls of his fleet. They thought we'd fight their war, he replied. A pause. We didn't. He turned back to the console, already reviewing what remained. Because the war wasn't about proving strength. It was about ensuring no one ever questioned it again.